Welcome to Real Estate Photography, Really Bad Light. North-facing houses, such as this house right here, never get the sun shining on them. There's sun on the environment, on the landscape around them. It's a beautiful house. The sun never actually hits the front of the house. So we want to get detail in the surroundings, in the landscape, and in the front of the house. In fact, you can see me. Where the sun is shining, it's burned out. My face is dark. If I take my hat off, you can see, well, other than that I have no hair, you can see that immediately I'm illuminated. As soon as I put my hat on and the shade comes in, there's very little information there. So in real estate photography and architecture photography, we have to use a number of tools that I will now show you that we apply to situations like this, where the house is dark and everything else is very bright. So this is the same house, but photographed with a high-resolution digital camera. This is the image as it actually came from the camera, as the camera saw it, or as the camera is able to display it. The camera actually saw it in much greater detail with a much greater tonal range, but it can't display it all at the same time. So what we have to do as professional photographers in this business is make multiple exposures on a tripod that are identical, so that we can get a good exposure for the shadow area on one, a good exposure for the highlight area on another, and a good exposure for all the middle areas on yet another. And then we combine them in a photo manipulation program called Photoshop, which many of you may have heard. And we bring out then a much higher dynamic range of exposure and put them all in the same shot. Because the object of the exercise is the house is king. So the house must stand out first when you look at the photograph. Then you look at what's around it, and you establish the order of priority in which the eye travels through the photograph. You're selling the house. Secondarily, you're selling the property. So this is what guides us as photographers. So now we've established a very nice balance of exposure. The house looks lovely. It stands out from the photographs. We have lovely light and a dappled shade over the environment. However, what we also see is with a wide-angle lens, we're having to look up at the house because we're not as tall as the house is. So there's a slight distortion with the house getting a little narrower at the top than at the bottom. This is always a little distracting. Most people won't really notice it, but when you see the difference between doing it correctly and having that slight distortion, it makes a big difference in the way people respond to the house. But like most things, when you apply one correction, it creates other problems. In this case, the house is a little squished down. It's not as tall as it actually is. So we just elongate the house a little bit again in Photoshop, get it back to where it should look, and presto, we have a photograph that looks fabulous, even really after some pretty lousy lighting situations. This house should sell, it should be attractive, and it should gain people's attention looking like this. So just to see how far we've come, this is our finished product, and this is where we started from. You can all see, I'm sure, a major difference and a great difference in saleability. Now we move on to another example of the same sort of thing and another solution. This is another lovely house. It has exactly the same problem. It's north-facing. The sun will never shine on its front, so it's always in shadow. So when we have a correct exposure for the garden, the grass, the trees, the sky, and the environment, the front of the house is very dark indeed. So we did the same thing with this house that we did with the previous house. We held the exposure of the surrounding area and brought in exposure into the front of the house. It looks very nice considering what we had to work with. However, there's another direction to go. We can do what's known as a twilight shot. In other words, a photograph taken just at twilight. So we have a very soft, almost nighttime feel, and we put in lights that we shine on the front of the building. And we have the lights on in the house. In this particular case, the lights in the house were very weak, and we would have had to come back a second time to photograph it, bringing more lights with us. Nevertheless, the lighting on the house that we were able to achieve with artificial lights is a little imbalanced. So we still have to go in, we have to balance out that lighting and make it all more even so the house stands out, it looks good, and it's a very saleable property. And at the same time, we make a description of the grass, the trees, and the surroundings. We set the ambiance so that it's something that people will look at and want to come and see.